So I'm here to introduce Matt Spoke from the Open Application Network, and he's got a video update on what they've been up to lately, and so everyone can hear what's going on with the project.
Hi, welcome to my presentation. My name's Matthew Spoke. I'm the founder and CEO of the Open Application Network and what's commonly known in the industry as the digital asset OAN. Today, I'm going to give you a presentation about what we've been up to since the beginning of the project, originated about 3 years ago, what some of our key milestones are today, what the focus of the business has sort of evolved into, to give you a little bit of insights into a new product that we're building. So first and foremost, as you can see from this title, I'm going to talk to you today about a financial reputation for millions of gig workers, which should probably hint at the direction that we're taking the project. And specifically a product that we've been developing for the last 4 months that we're really excited about that's going to make best use of the Open Application Network's blockchain infrastructure, and talk a little bit about how that's going to impact OAN, the asset, as we evolve this product in the near future. So first and foremost, I'm going to rewind about a year. About a year ago, if I were to look at the OAN project, which is how it was known at the time, I probably would have, quite honestly, fallen short to be able to tell you how we differentiated ourselves from others in the market. We looked at a very, very broad array of smart contract platforms, public blockchain protocols, all sort of competing for what we consider to be a very closed and niche market of developers that were building dApps on top of some of these ecosystems. Obviously, the lion's share of that market has gone to the Ethereum ecosystem, where you see a huge amount of really interesting innovation getting developed. And for the most part, a lot of these other protocols failed to stand out, failed to sort of make a compelling case for why, they could solve a problem uniquely that no other protocol could solve. And so we started reevaluating our strategy with an eye towards how do we sort of carve out a niche that we could sort of make our primary focus as a project moving into 2020 and 2021. So I'm going to give you a little bit of historical context on how we approached that analysis. And it gives, I'll step back and do a little bit of, education that I think is not foreign to most of you, to talk about both the value proposition that we see as being the main pitch for Bitcoin, the value proposition that I think the industry would probably agree with that is the main pitch for Ethereum. So namely, fiat money is manipulated, limited by political will and borders in the case of Bitcoin. In the case of Ethereum, the fact that the internet stack is fundamentally broken, it's overly centralized, and there's probably a room to develop something new. This is what led to the thesis of state-free money that is, exciting most people in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and the thesis of the decentralized internet, which excites most people in the Ethereum ecosystem. So within this landscape, where could we operate? Where could we differentiate as a project, as the Open Application Network, and as OAN, the digital asset? And the area that we started focusing on very specifically was this third area that, broadly was us identifying and observing that within the growing gig economy, there were specific companies and their ecosystems that were facing very, very, noticeable challenges that were hitting the mainstream media. And within there, we think that there's a design space for us to build something completely new and compelling that specifically targets the problems being experienced by ecosystems surrounding the gig economy. So you can think of companies like Uber, companies like Upwork, companies like TaskRabbit, and the workers that earn their livings on top of these platforms. And I'll make it a little clearer as I go in terms of what those problems really are. So when we started designing strategy for the Open Application Network and for OAN, we really saw ourselves filling this third bucket. What would be the asset or the group of assets that would actually be able to address some of these problems. So quite distinct from the state-free money thesis, quite distinct from the decentralized internet thesis, and we wanted to build something net new. So let me give you a little bit of context on how we broke down and analyzed the problems that we saw and observed within the gig economy. I've kind of categorized these into three problems. Problem number one is the problem of common goods. This is, if you're not familiar with this company particularly, this is a company called Foodora, which operates in many countries around the world in food delivery, very similar to Postmates or DoorDash or many others in this category. Using this worker as an analogy, the thing that is often overlooked is the fact that these workers put themselves at great risk to deliver food to their customers. And in most circumstances, if you were a delivery driver, let's say for a pizza restaurant before the gig economy actually became a thing, you would have some sort of employment relationship with that restaurant, which would generally cover things like disability insurance if you were to get hit by a car on your way to delivering pizza, which would result in you maybe losing your income for 6 weeks or something like that. Today, workers in the gig economy, let's say food couriers as an example, go without these types of safety net financial products that would, normally be taken for granted if you were employed by a company that offered these types of benefits and insurance products. But if you're an independent worker in the gig economy, you don't get access to common goods. The ability for you to use sort of the purchasing power of tens of thousands of workers in the same economy to go and buy affordable insurance products, as an example. This is not a problem that's been solved by Uber. It's not a problem that's been solved by Postmates or any of their peers. And so this is a problem that we think is a very, very large and unaddressed problem that is leading to massive tensions between these workers and their platforms. In some cases, these tensions have led to protests and demands for unionizations and change of legislation in the case of California. The second problem is stakeholder alignment. And it's sort of follows on the first problem, is the fact that more and more critique is coming out about this industry. People seeing that Uber profits on the back of an underpaid driver. Initially, this was a model that was intended to sort of offer a new pricing strategy into ride sharing, for example. And so it was normal that Uber was going to be providing a service at a lower cost than taxis. But what nobody really paid attention to until very recently is that on the receiving end of that is a driver who still needs to earn a living. And we've seen this, stakeholder alignment problem boil over to a point of, again, protests, again, legislative change, again, demands for Uber and Lyft and their peers to start treating these workers as employees and paying them effectively a fair minimum wage or something along those lines. This is the type of tension within an ecosystem that we think leads to very unsustainable business models. So when we consider, the best interests of Uber as well as the best interests of the Uber driver, both of these entities are, aligned in the context of wanting Uber to continue to exist long term. But in one case, the driver is not getting what they deem to be their fair share. In the other case, Uber can't bend that much without breaking their economic model. So within there is sort of an economic tension that's resulted that we think there's an interesting, again, design space for us to build a new type of software that solves for some of the stakeholder misalignment. And then the third is more broadly the problem of data ownership. The problem that if you are a worker in any one of these ecosystems, you do not own your own profile. You do not own your own star ratings. You do not own your own customer reviews. And as a result, you're sort of held hostage to the platform that you operate on. If you decide to leave Uber after 5 years, you leave behind your star rating. You leave behind all of the goodwill that you've developed over the course of that career, over the course of that work experience. And so we think there's an opportunity to sort of rethink the model of data ownership in the gig economy in such a way that the worker is sort of at the center of that equation. And the labor market, Uber, Postmates, DoorDash, TaskRabbit, are sort of put in a position where they have to compete for the labor supply rather than the reverse, where they sort of lock the labor into their markets and make it very difficult for people to leave or move on in their careers. And so this led us to the realization that our strategy should not be to compete with Bitcoin, should not be to compete with the decentralized internet, but to create a third category that we called open applications. Effectively, a domain of products that could be built to augment existing online marketplaces, existing online ecosystems, with a specific and particular focus on the gig economy. And so what I want to talk to you a little bit more about over the course of the rest of my presentation is how we're building within the open application space, how we're building a product to solve some of these problems in the very, very near term. In fact, we've already launched one of these products in market today. So this is the broad pitch behind the open application network that we announced in November. It's the reason that this system continues to operate as a public blockchain with its own digital native asset called OAN. And on top of this system, we're now starting to build a product. And that product is something we call Moves. Moves is a financial services product that we've started developing in January of this year, targeting what we as the independent worker. The independent worker is not exclusively the gig worker. It includes the gig economy and its labor force, but it also includes people like freelancers, contractors, people who don't find themselves in traditional employment relationships as their primary source of income. These people, by and large, have very limited access to financial products for the very simple reason that they earn their income differently. So banks don't know how to evaluate their risk. Credit bureaus don't know how to evaluate their risk. And generally speaking, these people go unaddressed or underserved. This seemed like a huge opportunity for us to jump into. So we started building Moves, both with the premise to solve a very critical problem for this demographic, but also with the premise to demonstrate some of the capabilities of the open application network and build core components of this product on top of our blockchain. So So I'm going to walk you very quickly through sort of the narrative. The rise of the independent worker is no surprise to anybody. In the US today, 57 million Americans identify as freelancers or independent workers. And that number is growing year over year. This is becoming a much more normalized way to earn a living. But the trade-off to that is that these people are increasingly being forgotten or left out of the financial services sector. And the main reason for that is that banks are just simply not keeping up with the pace of change in the labor market. So if you're worker within this demographic, you often find yourself having to rely on payday lenders, family and friends, or just go completely underserved when it comes to products like insurance, retirement savings, benefits, and others. And so this leads to a massive, massive opportunity. 50 million plus customers alone in the US, let alone the rest of North America and the world, as this market continues to grow. And our general hypothesis is that banks are not going to get there fast enough. So somebody needs to step in and build the financial services platform of this new economy. So what are we building? Today, we have a product in alpha, in market, in Toronto, Canada, more broadly in the province of Ontario, available to people who earn their primary source of income as rideshare drivers or food couriers on popular apps that you might be familiar with. They can apply for credit with us, credit ranging from $500 to $2,500. And we effectively start to develop a brand new credit reputation or financial reputation for these workers without looking at their FICO score. And the premise is that as we develop that reputation, we design it in such a way that we return the ownership of that data back to the customer. And that's a function that we're building on top of the Open Application Network. Today, a customer can sign up, apply for a loan. In the process of doing so, they're giving us access to their banking data. In a very near-term future state, they're going to be giving us access to their platform profile data. So think of their Uber work profile as an example, for us to effectively build out a new risk model that allows us to qualify people for credit. Beyond that, we're going to be entering into markets like insurance, entering into markets like benefits, retirement savings, and other financial products that you and I might take for granted that these people just have very limited access to. We've been very, very excited about the early success of our alpha in Toronto, and have very quick short-term goals of growing the size of this product, the geographies that we cover, and quickly taking our first step into the U.S. market. This gives you a little bit of an understanding of what that product experience feels like to a customer today coming to Moves for the first time and signing up for an account. To the customer, there's relatively little exposure to the back-end system that's being built on the blockchain. Most of the actual payment system is being built through traditional financial rails. But as we evolve the product, we're going to see more and more of the financial reputation we develop hosted as a self-sovereign smart contract on the network that effectively allows a customer to control the permissions and rights of their own data, but also eventually evolving into a peer-to-peer marketplace where AON holders can be the second side of the market, where they can actually invest their AON into a yielding lending product that is then on the other side of the market being made available as cash to a worker in the gig economy to borrow. And so this is, some of the big tangible things that we're working on as a team in Toronto as we go to market with Moves, alongside the continued work that we're doing on the protocol of the Open Application Network. Without diving too much deeper into that, if you want to learn more about what we're building in Moves, you can absolutely do that at movesfinancial.com. The Open Application Network, you can learn more about that product at the OAN.
When we get Matt on here, so I'm going to invite him on screen for the Q&A session.
Hey, Wilson.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for the video. Great visuals, great talk. So the last time we spoke, it was during the I had a real conversation was during the AMA with Masari back in November, and that was like around the time you just rebranded to the OAN, and just out of curiosity, that was kind of like a change and almost like a go-to-market strategy, and you're really starting to see this kind of come to life right now. What kind of led you down that path, and what kind of exposure are you seeing right now as you're starting to build out this Moves product?
Yeah, I think we probably talked about this back in November. I mean, the biggest realization that we spent a lot of time thinking about this as a team was sort of trying to be honest with ourselves about what problems we were really trying to solve. We spent 3 years working on our protocol, developing some pretty novel technology. But I think one of the shortcomings that the entire industry continues to have is a limited amount of mainstream demand coming into these systems that is not just circular in nature. And I say that in the sense, without criticizing any projects, there's just a lot of crypto products for crypto people, and not a lot of products being built sort of targeting mainstream problems that are being felt by average people in the world. So that was sort of the beginning in November when we started working on the positioning of the protocol as the open application network, and then with the intent to actually go into market and build a consumer product that sort of fit that narrative, which is what we've been working on since December, January with moves. So pretty excited about the progress we've made in the last 6 months.
That's great. The one aspect we were talking about, it kind of has a little bit of aspects for both. Like you have the crypto native side, the token holders, then you abstract might be like the complexities underneath for the consumer side. Do you see any other? So I was at the team behind Open Application Network doing work on this. Do you see any other development teams kind of building different applications in like a similar sense?
Yeah, well,
just trying to do.
Yeah, one of the things that we sort of took away in last year with the shift towards the open application network was that the strategy needed to become a lot more vertical in nature, in the sense that, I think there's been a lot of the metrics that people were pointing to 2-3 years ago was, look how many apps were being built on my protocol. When in like reality, most of these apps were sort of like artificial in nature. They either had no users, or if you saw any amount of like real transaction volume going through it, most of the time it was like fake transaction volume just being like pumped through by the application teams themselves. So, a lot of it was missing the point. I think one of the things that we did last year, we entered into a relationship with the Prism Economics Group that has done a lot of like economic thinking around sort of the design of different crypto protocols and the economic drivers of different assets. And what became a lot clearer to us was that, the primary driver of value in an asset like AON, or any other asset in the crypto market for that matter, is like economic activity denominated in that asset. And so how can you create a market that sort of generates economic activity for the asset that is core to your protocol? And so for us, going away from this horizontal strategy of, hey, we're a platform for third-party developers to build on, and going towards a vertical strategy that says, hey, we're still an open source protocol, still completely open doors if anybody wants to come build on our protocol, but we're putting our resources towards a singular product, a singular vision that we're sort of like putting most of the emphasis on right now. There are still a number of companies and products and tools that have been built to support the open application network, both in terms of like tooling and infrastructure, as well as a number of apps. But most of our resources and time now are going towards the development of Moves and its architecture on the open application network.
Got it. And what led you to really kind of focus on this, like the gig economy? Was it mainly just through like user feedback, or was this something like you experienced too, and like just kind of brought to the table?
I mean, it's been like a personal interest for a long time, and trying to figure out the right timing. I mean, it became really, really clear, and I think it would, most people could probably relate to this. It became really, really clear in like middle to end of last year that there was something changing in that market that was boiling over into like a mainstream conversation. And this was, California announced new laws last year called AB5, which were their new like employment laws targeting gig economy workers. Uber was seeing protests in major cities around the world and boycotts and things like that. And there was this tipping point happening, because I think for the first time in like the last decade since the gig economy has sort of been a thing, we started to see that the numbers of people that were earning their income from these markets was now, relevant. You could no longer ignore this demographic of people. And we spoke to, like, as part of the product discovery that we were doing, we spoke to a lot of companies in this space, Uber and the likes, to try to better understand like where the pain points were that they were experiencing, because we didn't want to position them as sort of there was no demonizing of Uber. I mean, I think everybody would agree that DoorDash, Postmates, Uber, TaskRabbit, these companies have provided huge economic value to the world, but they've sort of painted themselves into a corner where they now have this new problem that they face, which is the relationship with their workforce and the economic stability of their workforce. And to us, that was a perfect opportunity to step in and showcase, like, how could you build financial services for a class of worker that is ignored by traditional financial services? And so the problem sort of painted itself for us to a large extent. I think the timing was really critical. And we got a little bit lucky here, is that the transition to new laws in California, which are now conversations in New York and Canada and other states across the US, where people are now paying very, very close attention. And then COVID-19 happened. And frankly, we couldn't have really we couldn't have really picked a better moment for this, because I think the one thing that became really obvious during the last 3 months is that this worker that most people have ignored has now become front and center as like a critical frontline worker. These people are delivering food to people in quarantine and on lockdown. They're driving people to the hospital in their Ubers. And still, these people go completely unprotected by the traditional safety net that usually exists, right? The insurance safety nets and the benefit safety nets and these types of things. So, now the world started paying attention to the fact that, like, you might have been able to ignore the DoorDash courier before, but now they're at your doorstep every day delivering you food, or the Instacart grocery deliverer or whatever. And now people were starting to like clue in that these people needed an extra hand. So when we launched the product in April, we launched an alpha of the product, which is in its current form a lending product. We were blown away by the reception. I think people were, realizing that it was probably about time that somebody would start addressing this demographic in a meaningful way.
That's great to hear. It's very fascinating to see something, especially on the consumer side, come up on this front. We're running short on time, so I guess last question is, where can we learn more about the OAN and keep in touch?
Yeah, I mean, so check us out at the OAN.com, movesfinancial.com, and maybe Wilson, if you let me like finish off with one quick thought. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been particularly passionate about in the crypto space is the advent of open finance and decentralized finance. And I think, we want to continue pushing for like best in class designs happening in that space. But I think what's been missing and what we're trying to solve for in the equation is the consumer demand side of the equation. We can build all the complicated and sophisticated financial market products we want, but if we can't bring new consumers to these markets, I think we're going to fail to solve the end goal. So that's what we've been focusing on with Moves and the OAN, and excited about that.
That's fantastic. Well, I'll be keeping a close eye on it. Looking forward to what comes next. And thanks for joining us. I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Wilson. Bye.
Yep. Bye.